Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the fifth webinar of 2018, brought to you by the Ontario Soccer Player Development Department. Tonight we're joined by a special guest, Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt from the University of Ottawa, who's going to talk to us about the importance of social-emotional development in youth soccer. Just a bit of a bio before we begin from Tracy. Tracy Vaillancourt, or Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt, is a Canadian Research Chair in Children's Mental Health and Violence Prevention at the University of Ottawa, where she is cross-appointed as a full professor in Counselling Psychology and the School of Psychology. She's also an elected member of the College of Royal Society of Canada, and Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt's research examines the links between bullying and mental health. Tracy's also a provincial B licensed coach, and she's been coaching for many years and been involved in the game at various levels, both as a coach at the club level and also with the provincial programme. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Dr. Vaillancourt to take us through this evening.
Thanks, Billy. I'm in a very squeaky chair, so my apologies if it's distracting. So tonight we're going to talk about the importance of social-emotional development in youth soccer. So social-emotional development includes interrelated cognitive, affective, and behavioral competencies that help children cooperate with others, follow directions, pay attention, and self-regulate. Researchers have identified 5 competencies that are believed to be the most important for school and life success. These include self-awareness, so the ability to recognize emotions in self and in others, self-management, the ability to regulate these emotions and a person's behavior, social awareness, the ability to perspective take and to empathize, relationship skills, so forming healthy relationships with peers and with adults, and making responsible decisions across a variety of different situations. Research in this area of development consistently shows that social-emotional competence is associated with positive developmental trajectories. For example, social-emotional competency in childhood is associated with future positive health, education, and well-being. And targeting social and emotional competencies in schools is associated with better social and academic adjustment, reduced levels of problematic behavior, and reduced emotional distress. Considering these results, educators from around the world have begun to focus in earnest on social-emotional learning, and this focus has produced positive results. For example, in a recent meta-analysis that involves close to 100,000 children in kindergarten to grade 12, in this study, there was an 11 percentile point gain in academic achievement for youth who had participated in a social-emotional learning program compared to those who did not. What's more, research supports a strong economic and societal return on investing in social-emotional development, a return that far exceeds a focus on academics. Indeed, for every dollar invested in social-emotional learning, there is an $11 return. So how does social-emotional development relate to soccer? The Canadian Soccer Association and Ontario Soccer have developed a 4-corner player development model. This Canadian Soccer Excel program is charged with achieving technical perfection by developing players who are physically, technically, tactically, mentally, and socially emotionally competent. Many coaches are comfortable developing players' skill and tactical knowledge. Coaches are also familiar with the mental aspects of player development. A much neglected area of development, however, is social-emotional competency. The CSA states that social-emotional development is important because it has an indirect impact on players' performance. In this webinar, I will present information on how, in fact, the evidence supports a direct link between social-emotional development and player performance, as well as player retention. And my focus will be on relationship skills. That is, healthy relationships between teammates and players and coaches. Gregg Popovich, the famed head coach of the San Antonio Spurs and the longest tenured active coach in the NBA, emphasizes the importance of relationships. In a 2013 interview with Bleacher Report, Coach Popovich said that relationships with people are what it's all about. You have to make players realize you care about them, and they have to care about each other and be interested in each other. Then they start to feel responsibility towards each other. Then they want to do for each other. The reason that I argue that the link between social emotional competency, player performance, and retention is direct rather than indirect is because the need to belong is a fundamental, biologically based human drive. That is, the need to belong is a fundamental human motivator. The research in this area is clear and unequivocal. When children and youth don't belong, they do not flourish, and their potential is often derailed. And in soccer, when children and youth don't belong or feel that they don't belong, they are reluctant to try, to take risks, to fully participate. This impacts their performance and their attendance. This reaction is not unique to soccer. In fact, research on the long-term consequences of peer rejection has consistently demonstrated that not belonging negatively impacts virtually all aspects of functioning. Not belonging is associated with concurrent and future academic difficulties, school truancy and avoidance, increased absenteeism, somatic complaints, stress-related illness, physical health problems, low self-esteem, depression, social withdrawal and isolation, social anxiety, loneliness, suicide, and aggressive behavior. When kids don't belong, they either get mad or they get sad, and neither reaction is good for their well-being. And so, the research shows that belonging is strongly linked to mental health and resilience. But it's also linked to player retention and player performance. And not surprising, player retention, performance, and belonging are inextricably related. Youth cannot get better at soccer if they drop out. They also don't improve when they don't feel like their coach or their teammates care about them. In a recent systematic review examining dropout from organized soccer, Temple and Craig found that the primary reasons children and youth quit soccer was because of perception of competence. They didn't think they were good enough, a lack of fulfillment of basic psychological needs, so they didn't feel connected to others, poor relationships with coaches and teammates, a lack of enjoyment, a lack of opportunity to play, having a later birth date, so the relative age effect, and time demands. So the time to get to the field, to practices and games was too onerous. Relationships matter for performance. In one study by Edwards, looking at male varsity soccer players, testosterone levels were impacted by belonging. Specifically, testosterone and cortisol increased during the competition, but the increase in testosterone was related to players' perception of being socially connected. A few facts about cortisol and testosterone. Cortisol is a diurnal hormone that is highest in the morning and it reduces over the course of the day. Cortisol is also high when a person is exposed to a stressor, which would include sports competition. Cortisol is part of a complex set of interactions that comprise the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, which is also known as the stress response system. Testosterone, as most of you know, is a sex hormone that increases muscle and bone mass and is linked to enhanced sports performance. Testosterone is related to cortisol, and they typically work in somewhat opposite directions. So when cortisol increases too much, testosterone decreases. Ideally, we want cortisol to be elevated, but not too elevated during a competition, and we want testosterone to be high. The ratio between testosterone and cortisol is widely used for studying and preventing overtraining in various sports, including professional soccer players. So in this study, a better hormone profile was achieved when players felt connected to their teammates. The robustness of this relationship between testosterone and belonging for male soccer players was confirmed in a recent meta-analysis. Studies have also shown that cortisol, the stress hormone, is related to players' subjective feelings of belonging. And for girls and women, optimal performance and optimal HPA axis activation seems to be obtained by affiliating before a game. So what are the implications for coaching? John Herdman often talks about our women's national team being the most connected team. John stresses the importance of relationships in relation to team performance and success. This focus on relationships has translated to podium outcomes that include 2 back-to-back bronze medals and a current 5th place FIFA ranking. John's approach to social-emotional development is consistent with research findings, which demonstrate over and over again that relationships matter. For example, John Krause and colleagues examined how physical touch impacted performance by coding the touch behavior of players from the NBA during the 2008 and 2009 season. Touches included high fives, pats on the back, and the like. Results indicated that early season touch predicted greater performance in individual and team performance later in the season. John Herdman's focus on having a connected team is well rooted in science. The studies reviewed thus far suggest that belonging in soccer is related to enhanced performance and that there's a biological profile associated with positive peer relations, which seems to be linked to better achievement. Perhaps not surprising then, is research demonstrating the opposite effect. That is, studies showing a strong relationship between not belonging and dysregulation of the HPA axis. That is, dysregulation of the stress response system. For example, in our study, bullying was related to high cortisol via depression, and this had a negative effect on learning. Memory is very sensitive to the effects of cortisol. When people are stressed out, they do not learn. In another study of ours, we found low testosterone among bullied youth. Again, we aim to have high testosterone levels in sports and cortisol levels that are not too high or too low. This maximizes sports performance. It also improves learning and memory. Performance is best when anxiety is not too low or too high. And as I have argued throughout this webinar, having poor relationships is stressful to children and youth, and thus it affects their performance. So what can coaches do to improve the social-emotional development of their players? The first thing you can do is to focus on peer relationships. Take the time to notice who is and who is not included on your team, and then take the necessary steps to make sure that everyone is included. I was at an OPDL game this summer and watched the team arrive at the venue. One team came off the bus and followed their coach to the pitch. All of the girls were in a clique and they were laughing and having fun. But I noticed one player who was trailing behind. She wasn't included. She followed her teammates with her head down and her shoulders were also down. I wondered why she was not included. So I took note of her. When the game ended, I noticed the same player being excluded from the group. And I also noticed a coach who seemed to take little notice in this exclusion. Coaches need to manage their players' peer relationships so that everyone feels like they belong. This will improve your retention rates and the performance of your players. One thing I see coaches doing often is letting their players pick their partners. This is rarely done in education, and for good reason. There's always a kid left out, and it tends to be the same kid. So part of managing your practice is also managing the groups. And I strongly recommend that you pick the groups most of the time. One of my pet peeves in soccer is how goalkeepers are ignored by their teammates and sometimes their coaches when they've made a mistake. This is inherently unfair. Everyone makes mistakes, but the mistakes of keepers are so obvious. Coaches should get their players to support each other in good times and in bad times. A player is far more likely to rebound from a mistake if his or her teammates encourage rather than shuns. Encouraging players you should encourage players to collectively take responsibility and collectively support each other, especially when they are most vulnerable. That is, when they have made a mistake. The second thing you could do is focus on your relationships with your players. The most consistent asset of resilient children is a strong bond with a competent adult. Education studies consistently show that student achievement is linked to positive teacher-student relations. When a teacher cares about his or her students, students show up to learn, they try harder, they're better behaved, they're more motivated, and they're far more happy. Why would the coach-player relationship be any different? So get to know your players. Show an interest in them beyond soccer. Check in with them if they're injured. Greet them. I consulted with a school board in Ontario about improving student behavior and well-being. I told them about this old study I came across that showed that having a teacher greet students at the door of the classroom improved teacher-student relationships and the overall class climate. The school board tried this out in one high school and compared their referrals to the office to a similar high school in their district that did not have any greeting behavior. They noticed a significant reduction in problem behavior in the school that had teachers greet their students. A good handshake with eye contact and a nice greeting goes a long way to building relationships. It also gives you a great opportunity to check in with your players. And of significant importance, invest in all your players. If you invest in only a few players, your so-called stars, you will create a notable hierarchy within your team that will ultimately negatively impact individual and team performance. Studies of amateur and elite soccer players show that starters are more confident. And importantly, they have a biological profile that supports this confidence. So high testosterone levels, low cortisol levels. This makes sense. They have the endorsement of their coach. But what about the development and well-being of the other players on the team? Why are they not prioritized? If we did what we do in soccer and education, we would have a lawsuit on our hands. You cannot only focus on the best. Your goal as a coach is to help all children achieve their potential. And they cannot achieve their potential if they're no longer participating. Recall that one of the primary reasons players leave soccer is because of a lack of opportunity to play. Winning is nice, but not at the expense of development. If you're coaching children and youth and you're not invested in all your players, you're doing a disservice to them and to the game. I currently have 4 players that I used to coach who are now part of Canada's youth national teams. And one thing is clear, none of them were the best players at U9, U10, or U11. As Mark Sullivan has said many times, we want as many as possible for as long as possible, because you cannot predict who will be the next Christine Sinclair at age 8, age 10, or age 14, despite what people say over and over again. The third thing you can do to improve the social emotional development of your players is to strive to be socially and emotionally competent yourself. Indeed, the social emotional development of players is linked to their coach's social emotional competence. Good coaches, like good teachers, have high self-awareness. They recognize their emotions. They have high social awareness. They can tell if someone's not being included. They respect others and are pro-social, and they are self-regulated. Finally, social emotional development is promoted through the creation of a positive soccer environment. A positive soccer environment shares the same characteristics of a positive school climate. This includes a respect for diversity, a sense of connectedness among team members, and a pattern of positive relationship between and among players and coaches. Positive school climate is associated with better academic achievement, better peer relationships, and better mental health among students. I imagine the effect of a positive soccer climate will be the same. In terms of how to achieve this, studies have shown that teachers who provide high support and high structure have students who fare the best. High structure and high support maps onto an authoritative parenting style that has also been shown to be associated with the best child outcomes. Conversely, poor child outcomes are associated with three other types of parenting styles: authoritarian, negligent, and permissive. Authoritarian parenting style, and we see this in coaches too, they say things like, it's my way or the highway. These parents and coaches think that kids should follow the rules without exception. A negligent style is about not really caring. These parents and these coaches don't spend time with their children, with their players, and they are unaware of who they are, where they are, who they're with, what they're doing, and the like. And finally, a permissive style is you just let them do whatever they want to do. You may have rules, but you rarely enforce them. And you tend to think that children flourish with little interference. As a coach, you should take note of these styles and aim to have high support and high structure. Like good teaching and parenting, good coaches put effort into ensuring that they have a positive relationship with their players. They explain the reasons for their rules and decisions, and when they enforce rules and give consequences, they always take into account their players' feelings. Authoritative parents, teachers, and coaches promote social-emotional development, and children and youth flourish under this type of guidance. As I stated at the beginning of this webinar, social-emotional development has a direct impact on player performance as well as retention. It therefore needs to be prioritized. Coaches, like teachers and parents, are the architects of asset development in youth. Our role is not just to help players improve skill and tactical knowledge. Our role is to also help them develop social-emotional competencies that will have a positive impact on their health and their learning trajectories that extend well beyond the soccer pitch. And one way to achieve this is through healthy relationships between teammates and healthy relationships between players and coaches. Coach Reed says, I get it, you know the game very well, but do you know the child well? Techniques and tactics are useless if you don't know anything about those who you're trying to coach. And then on that note, I'm happy to take some questions.
So if you have any questions for Dr. Vaillancourt, feel free to use the question box. It's on the right-hand side at the bottom of the navigation bar. If you want to type in the question, if you have any, and Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt can answer the questions that come in.
So we wanted to keep this short and to the point. We recognize your time is important. We have one question that just came in. Does Ontario Soccer have a coaching code of conduct? Ontario Hockey has one, and it's obvious to find one. Yes, Ontario Soccer does have a well-articulated coaching code of conduct, and it can be found on their website. And if you have any trouble finding it, just be sure to get in touch with Billy. We'll see if there's any more. Okay, so one of the questions is that my recommendations were gender neutral. Any differences on the importance between boys and girls? That's a great question, Patrick, and there is some pretty significant differences. So for example, studies have shown that girls are more affected by not getting along with their peers than boys. I don't want to give the false impression that boys don't care. They absolutely care, but they tend to be more affected. They also notice it more, and studies looking at their physiological reaction shows that they ramp up really quickly. Girls stay on teams because of friendships primarily. And any of you who've had a daughter who's quite talented and you've wanted to move them to a different coach perhaps, or a different club, I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of resistance because they want to be with their friends. So the importance of relationships is there for boys and girls, but it's particularly pronounced for girls. And I think we need to be mindful of that. I'm always struck by the fact that I watch coaches not paying attention to the peer groups, to the cliques that are on their team. And I think if you want to have happy, developing players, those that are going to be attending practice and they're going to stay with your team and your club, you need to be attending to those needs. And girls in particularly are particularly sensitive to that. Kristen's asking, how do you bring this up to your coach if you feel like your child is being treated poorly or excluded? This is tough because one of the things I know, especially for parents that have children who are playing competitive soccer, is that we're so worried about derailing their potential as soccer players that we don't want to address it with the coach for fear of the fact that there may be a reprisal. I don't think that's, I mean, I could appreciate why people are worried about it, but for the most part, my experience with the coaches in Ontario is that they're really good people who want to do right by kids. And I know that every club has a policy on how children are to be treated by coaches and other players. And so I think that you stand on firm ground being able to address it with your coach. That said, if you do address it with your coach and he or she does nothing, then it tells you something about the fact that that coach probably needs a little bit more guidance, and then maybe involve the technical director. Has the OSA considered drafting a manual of team building inclusion activities for coaches to access, perhaps a joint venture we could undertake across the province? I'll leave that to Billy. Billy, is there any thought about that?
Well, most of the activities and most of the resources that are prepared for the grassroots age groups are considering the social emotional side of player development. So you'll see on our session plans, which are released once a week, there's over 100 available online. There's very specific information contained in those session plans that focus on the social emotional side of the development of the young players. Now, that's not it's not external or from the training environment. We focus on creating a session that tailors to all four corners of development.
The next question is, how can I help my son from nervousness before an important game? That's a great question, because we talked a little bit about how we want this ideal profile in a sense. So we want them to be, have a little bit of anxiety is good, but too much anxiety is going to impede performance. And we don't want them to completely be nonchalant about this either, because that's not been shown to be related to optimal performance. So one of the things obviously depends on their age, but as a psychologist, I would recommend talking through what the script is. So one of the things that makes kids nervous is that they don't know what to expect. And of course, you don't know you can't control all the variables in a game, but you can go over what the expectations are for the game. Also, we tend to make things bigger than they are. Games are bigger for coaches and for adults than they are for kids. So I think we need to put things in perspective, and that should probably help your son with his nerves. So give him a good idea of what's to come and what's expected, but have a realistic expectation of what it means. As a girl coach, I find girls tend to be shunned if they don't conform with the group. Boys, on the other hand, seem more comfortable showboating. How can the coach help girls freely express themselves without the negative impact to acceptance from the group? Patrick, you're so right. And it's really interesting because tomorrow I'm doing a presentation for the technical director's course, and I have more on that. I just wanted to we wanted to keep this a little bit shorter, recognizing people are taking time off at night to listen to this. But one of the things is that the research shows is that girls become particularly vulnerable when there's a tall poppy on the team. So when we highlight girls and girls are really competent, we set them up for failure with their teammates. Whereas for boys, it's the opposite. The boys who are really competent and you're using your word, that showboat, tend to garner a lot of positive attention from their peers. And this is kind of, it breaks my heart as a female, a coach of females, and as a woman myself, because we would want girls to be powerful and to express themselves freely without repercussion. But unfortunately, reality is that women and girls aren't very tolerant of girls and women who are confident. So we need to have a societal shift on this, a cultural shift on this. And perhaps it would be by, again, the coach explaining expectations, the coach managing peer relationships better than they actually do. You know, kids just show up and we put cones out and we expect everything's going to go well because we're teaching them this one skill or whatever it is, this tactic. And yet what we're doing is we're influencing who they're going to be in the future. So we need to be really mindful of their peer relationships. We'll see if there's any other questions. Okay, so on that note, just in summary, we want children playing soccer for as long as possible. I love the sport, Billy loves the sport, Ontario Soccer loves the sport. We want children enjoying this game. And one way to maximize their enjoyment is to prioritize their social emotional development. And in particular, take note of their peer relationships. Kids don't do well when they don't feel like they belong. They're not going to show up to practice. They're going to quit the team. They're not going to perform as well if they're worried about making a mistake on the field because of what their peers are going to think of them. And they don't respond well to coaches who don't take into account their perspective, who don't take into account their feelings. So we really need to be prioritizing social emotional development. If we prioritize this, we will have happier kids, we'll have kids who are performing better, we'll have better retention rates. I always talk about the litmus test of whether or not you're a good coach. If you walked into the grocery store and you saw an ex-player, are they going to head to the other aisle? Or are they going to come and greet you with a big smile on their face? And if they greet you with a smile on your face, you've done right by that kid. If they're ducking you, you might want to reconsider your behavior as a coach. So thanks for your time. Is there anything else we need to say, Billy?
No, thanks very much for joining us. If you were late or you would like to share tonight's webinar with your colleagues or anyone within your club or academy organisations, the webinar has been recorded and will be uploaded within the next week or so to our website. So there's some future webinars coming in 2018, so be sure to keep up to date through the newsletter and also on social media. We're pretty active at promoting using Twitter, and we'll be promoting future webinars through social streams. So thanks very much for joining us. Hope everyone has a good end to the year. Thanks very much.
Thank you.